Hi, I'm Gary Bolles. I'm the host of Global Skills Day. Welcome back to the main session. My guest is Lisa Gevelber, who is the CMO Americas. Lisa, it is so great to see you. I think that you and I met, it might have been just after you joined Google when we met at Zeitgeist. And it's been amazing to see your trajectory with the organization. So thank you for taking the time to join me this morning.
Oh my gosh, it's my pleasure. Yeah, it's been a long time. It's so great to see what you're doing too, Gary.
This has been a ton of fun. So I wanted to, our time is short, but I wanted to just dive in and you have, obviously you CMO Americas for Google. You've got a couple things on your plate for your day job, but you helped to catalyze something called Grow with Google. What was it that sparked your interest in wanting to help start that program, and why specifically related to training and work? So help people understand what the program is and why you cared about it so much.
Yeah, working on Grow with Google has actually been one of my favorite things I've done in my whole career. A million years ago, when I was in college, I did a summer internship in Chicago where I ran the Chicago City Summer Jobs for Youth program, and I put 125 inner city kids to work for the summer in Chicago. And ever since then, and the fact that I put myself through college, my parents couldn't afford it, and I worked my way since I was like 13 years old, saving enough money to put myself through school. And same with my brothers. This idea of economic opportunity has always been a personal passion point of mine. My father was first, he and his brother were first in his family to ever go to college. And so it's just always been something I've cared deeply about. But I think what's really exciting here is that Google cares deeply about this topic. So I proposed this idea of Grow with Google back in 2017. This idea that we wanted to ensure as Google that the opportunities that are created by technology would truly be available to everyone. And specifically, I'm talking about economic opportunity. And a lot of economic opportunity, as we all know, is about the ability to get a great job. And so a key focus for Grow with Google all along has been, how do you help people, no matter their educational or work background, work experience, get a great job? And many folks may not know this, but 2/3 of Americans don't get a four-year college degree. And what that means is there's 80 million American workers who feel locked out of good jobs. And that fundamentally does not need to be the case. And if we're going to create a more inclusive and equitable job market, we have to make opportunities for people without college degrees to get great jobs in high growth, high paying fields. And so a really important pillar of Grow with Google is something called our Career Certificate Program, where we provide everything someone would need to know to get a great entry-level job in a in-demand, high-growing, high-paying field. But we do so much more than that. A piece of it is helping train anyone who wants one of these jobs to get them. And then another big piece, which I hope we'll talk a little bit about today, is helping work on the ecosystem of employers and educational institutions so that we're all together really creating an economy that works for everyone. And so in 2017, we started this Grow with Google program with one career certificate in IT support. We have graduated more than 50,000 people in IT support just in the last few years. And since then, we've seen that this is such a good on-ramp, especially for non-traditional talent, that we've created 3 more career certificates. And now we have a whole portfolio, and people can train to be not just IT support professionals, but data analysts, user experience design folks, and project managers. And so it's really been a phenomenal program and a way to get non-traditional talent into these high growth, in-demand jobs.
Yeah, no, I think it's brilliant. So everything you're saying resonates with me. I personally don't have enough. I think I've admitted this in other sessions today. I personally don't have enough college to stuff into a thimble. So I am one of those people that wouldn't. I think I've said, Vint Cerf and I were talking earlier, and I frequently say in all the meetings that I've been in at Google, I'm always the oldest guy unless Vint shows up. And I know that I couldn't actually get any of the jobs of any of the people in the room because I don't have the degree that would support it. And so, but we know this is the world that we're shifting to, is much more just in time just in contact learning, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think the pandemic was a big pivot in the world of online learning, and I think for all of the terrible things that came with the pandemic, a few big opportunities have come, which we can talk about.
Well, so talk about how that sort of impacted you. I mean, for you and the family. I mean, how challenging that was, and then what your learnings were from the pandemic, especially about the program with Google, and we're talking about trying this sort of worker training and then the matching to work, and how did that shift in the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there is a such thing as a silver lining, I think the pandemic has done a few good things. I think it has created an opportunity to truly build an economy that works for everyone, and there is so much funding and focus on helping people get the skills they need for today's jobs. Even without the pandemic, the World Economic Forum said about half of people were going to have to retrain for jobs, and we know that 2/3 of even middle skill jobs, so jobs that don't require a college degree, actually require medium to high levels of digital skills. So that scenario existed before the pandemic. What I think has accelerated is now there is attention being paid and funding being paid to really helping people upskill for today's job. And I think there is a much bigger acceptance of online learning as a platform for reskilling Americans. We all know that among the 80 million Americans who don't have a college degree, many of them work in jobs that make it really hard to go sit in a classroom all day, right? That's not really an option for lots of folks, whether they need the money or their schedule just doesn't allow it, or maybe sitting in school just really isn't for them. And so I think having alternate pathways like the Google Career Certificates has become really important. And what we've seen is that employers really care about this. And I think that's the part we have to remember. So even in just the 4 fields that we teach in the Google Career Certificates, there's 1.3 million open jobs in the US. Employers need people to be trained for these jobs. And as a matter of fact, there's a recent PwC survey among CEOs that basically says, I think 46% of CEOs say something like reskilling and retraining is among their very top priorities. 4 out of 5 CEOs say finding people with the right skills is a real impediment to growth if they don't, right? So there's 2 sides to this equation. And I think one of the things we did with the career certificates that we built is we had employers input to them from the beginning. So people like Deloitte is a great example. They actually gave us the assessments they used to test for mastery for SQL and R in their data analysts. We built their assessments right into our certificate program. And now our certificate is a preferred requirement as they hire people for jobs, right? So this idea that employers can step in and help create the training, and all of our training is vetted by employers as we build it. So I think that's a big and good thing that may have come out of the pandemic, is really employers stepping up. We have 140 employers who employ people who graduate from our certificate program, and it's lots of really good, solid companies with great, great benefits for their employees.
No, absolutely. I mean, we've talked in other sessions about how important it is to have this sort of mindset shift by hirers. Everything from requiring what I call management by surveillance. You've got to have that worker directly in front of you, or you can't hire them. To understanding that they can be skilled through alternative routes, as Byron Auguste is going to be talking about right after you. Now, in a New York Times interview, you said, if your goal is economic mobility for folks, you have to do a lot more than create certificates. So, and you've also talked about the ecosystem. So one element obviously is changing the mindset of employers, but how do you think of all the different pieces that need to fall together? The training, you're right, online training is being more accepted, but there's all sorts of things that need to happen to ensure that a person finds not just the first job, but is continued to be able to find meaningful, well-paid work.
Yeah. I think the truth is, really changing the way the job market works is a huge undertaking, and it's going to take all of us, right? And so we're really working with so many terrific partners in the ecosystem. I'll just name a few. So first, interestingly, the education system, I think, plays a really important role. And we have come across and are working with very forward-thinking high school superintendents some in career and technical high schools, but some in regular school systems. In the community college system, we're working with over 100 community colleges already, and we're starting to see four-year institutions really want to deploy our career certificates. And I think that's super interesting, but it's based on a really important insight that those institutions have, which is that I talked about the opportunity for people without a college degree, but what's happening is four-year institutions want to partner with us because they realize that having their students get one of these career certificates will also make them more employable at higher wages. And we have data for this. So Burning Glass, for example, has data on this. I'll share my personal one. So I was a psychology major in college, but obviously I did not go into psychology. Well, if you're a psychology major now, Burning Glass says that you'll make on average $39,000 a year. But if you add to your psychology major a data analytics certificate, you'll make 60, and hundreds of thousands more jobs will be available to you. And, colleges are smart. They want their students to have great outcomes when they graduate. So lots of them are looking at data like this Burning Glass data, and they're saying, you know what? It's an and, not an or. Even college students can benefit from having one of these career certificates because, and we can talk about this in a second, like we're teaching not just how to do the job, but we're teaching a bunch of soft skills and stuff too, which are really useful for people in their career. So the first kind of partner is educational institutions. And then second is we're working with lots of government organizations. We have partnerships with workforce boards, the NAWB, for example, and we're really trying to make sure that those workforce boards have access to some of these great tools and to our employer consortium, right? Because nobody wants to be trained. People want to get great jobs. And training is just the path to get there. And so I think government partnerships like with these workforce boards are really important. And then I think the employer consortium is a big deal. Not only do we have 140 employers who are hiring the career certificate graduates, we also have employers who are using our career certificates to reskill their own employees. So, Nationwide Insurance is a great example of that. Even Accenture is a great example. They're using the Google career certificates to reskill the employees that they have. So I do think it's an ecosystem thing. And we have lots of also great nonprofit partners from, Perscolas and Year Up and Goodwill to Merit America, folks who are on the front line creating kind of cohort-based learning environments to help people get into these, high-paying, high-growth jobs.
No, I think it's brilliant because the commitment has to be thinking about all the different elements that need to be there for learner and worker success, and ensure that they don't fall through the cracks. Right? My continual phrase is "no human left behind." And unfortunately, what you find is the ones with the most agency, the ones that develop the skills the fastest, they're the ones that the job market already does pretty well for. It's the ones that have barriers and the ones that don't have access to a lot of those support services and that integrated model are the ones that have the most need. So, Lisa, our time together is way too short, but I want to make sure Aditi is asking in the chat. She's asking about the certificate programs for Grow with Google. Are you finding that what you think of as enough women are seeing, because a lot of we know the challenges with a lot of STEM careers is that we still are working on, some of that pipeline problem of ensuring that enough women want to be in tech careers. And are you seeing enough of what you would think of as women coming into the program, or is that one of the problems still to be solved?
Well, one of the ways we're measuring success ourselves is whether we're bringing non-traditional talent into these career fields. And so we measure a few things. First, we measure, do people say they got a better job or made more money? So 82% of our graduates say that because of the Google Career Certificate, they got a new job, a promotion, a raise, a real economic outcome. And then we look at who are we helping? And 53% of the people who graduate with a Google Career Certificate come from backgrounds that are not traditional in tech, either females, as you're saying, or underrepresented groups. And so we really do care about making sure that we're helping people who would not traditionally get into these jobs. And we're seeing really good success with that, even with the fact that it's a fully online program for most folks.
Oh, that's marvelous. So listen, again, our time is too short. I'm going to ask you the question that I've asked others. We have a magic wand. In one tweet, what's the one thing about the system that you would change to be able to encourage more of this connection between learning and working?
Oh, I'm not good at tweets, but I guess I would say we have a real opportunity now to create an economy that does work for everyone and let everyone live up to their full potential. And it's going to take the whole ecosystem, and you can count Google in. We're really committed to working with workforce boards and employers and nonprofits and educational institutions to really make a difference on this. And so I hope folks will reach out to me if they're interested in learning more. My email is just my last name at Google, so Gevelber@google.com.
Oh, that's marvelous. Thank you. So no, tremendously inspirational, Lisa. It's so great to see you again. So, and thanks for the great work with Grow with Google, and looking forward to future collaboration.
Me too. Thank you so much, Gary.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
All right. So my next guest is Byron Auguste. Byron, welcome.
Thanks, Gary.
So Byron is the CEO of Opportunity at Work, co-founder, tremendous background, formerly on the National Economic Council at the White House, like Mona Morshad, who I was my guest earlier, is ex-McKinsey. And I have to thank you for putting an op-ed into the Washington Post today. So we have a great opportunity to talk about some of your most recent thoughts. So, so Byron, first off, we've had some marvelous conversations in the past about the work that you're catalyzing. And I think you've championed what I find as one of the most resonant phrases that people use when they talk about trying to encourage hacking the system of employment, not just in the United States, but beyond, and thinking about candidate workers in a different way. And so you've continually championed the phrase STARS, skilled through alternative routes. Give us an example of a kind of job or the kind of training and experience that alternative means. What's a real world example that you can point to where somebody's applying for a job and a hirer has to think differently because somebody has learned in a different manner than traditional degrees would require?
Right. Well, Gary, I want to start just putting this term STARS, skilled through alternative routes, in its perspective. And this is even just for the United States. There are 71 million STARS who are skilled through alternative routes. So you might even start to ask yourself about the term alternative, because in fact, STARS are more than half of the workforce in the United States. And as a result, if you ask the question, what sort of jobs do STARS do? Well, they do basically every job that's done. So 4 or 5 million of those STARS are already in high wage jobs. They found their way through the cracks in the system. They might be software developers, CEOs, actually skilled trades is a big area. So they actually, that's the first thing. Humans are great learners. That's true of people who go to college. That's true of people who get their skills through alternative routes. That said, the largest number of STARS tend to be in jobs that are either low wage or middle wage. And again, since we're here on Global Skills Day, not Global Degrees Day or Global Wages Day, or Jobs Day, you actually see 30 million of the 70 million STARS. When you dig into the skill requirements of the jobs they're in, and you use all of the data and the sources, ONET and the like, you see 30 million STARS have skills today for jobs that pay at least 50% more than the jobs they're in. So, and this is across, dozens, scores, hundreds of jobs. So, and as an example, you see STARS that are in call centers, for example. There might be call center representative. You're like, your second level call center representative. You've got a tremendous number of the skills for technical help desk. You might very well have a lot of the skills to be a sales representative, is a job that might pay 80% more. You're a marketing and sales pipeline manager for a small business, auto parts. You're managing on an Excel spreadsheet or something, all of the things that a Salesforce administrator would do with better software and a better system, but no one's coming to try to get you to be a Salesforce administrator paying twice as much. they're training people who actually don't have the same skills you do. So you can see it throughout the economy. And one thing, if there's one message about stars, you can't have a talent strategy that's going to be effective and that ignores stars. If you're defining your way into a skills gap, if you only look at skills if they're required in this one narrow way of going through a bachelor's degree. So you need to value skills however they're required.
No, I think it's exactly the right mindset, because I mean, well, you're obviously preaching the converted. I don't have enough college to stuff into a thimble, so I don't think I would call myself a star, but I certainly was skilled through alternative routes, not through traditional education. And as I often say here in Silicon Valley, I look around the room and I pretty much assume that I could never have applied for any of the jobs of any of the people that I'm speaking with, because I would never have passed the filter set. And so what you're talking about, though, is requiring, I think of as a very different mindset by the hirer. I say in virtually every forum that I'm invited to, everything we're talking about systemically is marvelous, but if you don't change or help to encourage the change of the mindset of the hirer, it's all about risk management. If you knew the next person that walked in the door, you were absolutely guaranteed they were going to be good in the job, you'd hire them, right? So, but it's the risk of saying, no, wait a minute, they've got the high-end degree and they've got the 27 years of experience, and well, then obviously they're the candidate I need to choose. How do you change that mindset? How do you hack that approach? Because that's really the linchpin of so much of what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, you're asking exactly the right question, Gary, because there's, companies are not, they don't have a single brain and they just decide what to do. Companies are sort of societies, right? There's lots of different folks sort of dealing with the various risks that you mentioned. So with Opportunity at Work, we work with companies, big companies. We try to get three pieces working and help them get aligned. The first is at the C-suite. It's quite important that they see stars as part of their talent strategy, and that they don't just see small segments of the stars population as, oh, here's a kind of a corporate social responsibility thing. No, like this is part of our actual pipeline for skills development and to do the jobs we need doing and to be able to grow. Lisa mentioned that a high percentage of companies see lack of being able to get the right talent and skills as a barrier to growth. That is absolutely true, and stars need to be part of the solution. So that's one thing, to create that context for others to make those decisions. The second part is the hiring manager and the department in question. If it's marketing, it's the folks that are driving marketing or marketing and sales. If it's operations, if it's IT. And actually there, funny enough, that tends to be the place where you can get the most traction, because they tend to be the most focused on the actual skills that are relevant. And so if there are easy ways to sort of demonstrate or validate, if you will, the skills, whether it's the different kinds of certificates and so forth, there tends to be an openness there once they understand that it does reflect the skills they need. And then the third part is HR and talent acquisition, which in a sense is working, their customer is the internal customer. And so when you talk about risk aversion, they have there's a lot of passion often for expanding the pipeline, but they have to know that that's going to be kind of well viewed and well received by the hiring manager. So you need to get that aligned, and then you need to deliver. And that's where I think the ecosystem matters. And Opportunity at Work's view is, you don't want to have just a single way of delivering against it. You actually want to have a kind of a one-stop source where you can learn which of these alternative routes, whether it's some of those inclusive training providers, or if it's demonstration platforms like Stack Overflow or others. I mean, there's so many places that you can source stars. But frankly, it's really important that when companies get that alignment and start to move, that they can start to see results.
So I heard three key pieces. You need air cover from those who lead in the organization, because they've got to basically send all the right signals. Say, go ahead, take these risks. Like, we want you to do that. You certainly need to have a change in the mindset. And as I've said often, the hiring manager needs to actually understand the problems to be solved, and not put them in the language of the requirements for backgrounds, because they think that's going to reduce their risk. It has to be about the problems to be solved and the skills that can solve them. And then processes is the organization, it's HR, as Enrique and Istrak, so many people talking about hacking HR, how you can change those processes so that everybody gets what they want, that they're going to get the extremely qualified, extremely capable people, but that the qualifications aren't going to follow these traditional pick the mark kind of statements that you've had in the past.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Gary. And just because people often beat up on HR, it's worth noting that, I mean, HR has a real challenge, right? For big companies. I mean, you're trying to source a lot of talent. And frankly, right now, the exclusionary hiring practices are all automated. They're all on autopilot. They're all the defaults, whereas inclusive hiring is right now more cumbersome. It's smaller scale. We need to build the infrastructure. And that's a lot of what Opportunity at Work is doing. Like, we don't train people. There's lots of good ways to train people. We're not even doing the credentials. We heard Google, many others. We're making it possible for that all to live in the same kind of learning ecosystem, and where you can plug in and actually figure out what's going to work for you and send the demand signal to get more of it.
So you actually hit the key point of what one of the things I think is, from a macro standpoint, is really critical as well, is when you say demand signals. So one of the things that Lisa was talking about is basically saying, okay, so we know there's all these open jobs and we know there's this training needs to be done. But what's happened in the past is, in many industries, companies have jealously guarded the description of the skills that they're going to need because they see it as a competitive advantage. I'm going to keep it hidden inside the organization who I'm hiring for, because if I let my competitors know, then they'll see all the kinds of skills that I need and they'll go look for the same thing. And then we'll just keep on playing this arms race sort of thing. But what we saw with Michael Fung with Skills Singapore is that you have to have that kind of connective tissue. You've got to get isn't it critical to have organizations band together and have industries continually say the skill sets they're going to need? Because otherwise you get these massive market mismatches. I mean, we've got a huge market mismatch right now in the United States for a variety of reasons, but one of them is that organizations have not been that explicit in the past.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And every country that has made real traction here, and I've spent a lot of time in other countries on these issues too, it has some set of intermediaries that are very market responsive, but are not profit maximizing. Because right now we've fallen into a bit of a trap where companies are doing, frankly, a lot of free riding, because it works fine if everybody does their fair share of training and entry-level hiring, but it works even better if everybody else does it, and then you just poach at the end. And we have way too many free riders there. And, I think the trend is now starting to be in the other direction, but companies have a lot more work to do. But then on the government side, in the US, the way we are doing that is too slow. It took 18 years to reauthorize the Workforce Investment Act. I mean, that's obviously far too slow, but at the same time, we need this connective tissue. And that's part of what Opportunity at Work is doing. But there's so many fantastic organizations. And I think even our next speaker, Arne Duncan, who I worked with in the Obama administration on the big systems issues, he's now working in Chicago on a very specific scale. And that is so incredibly critical. But then what are you going to plug into to be able to then reach all the employers? If all the employers have to interface with all the great programs, that's an impossible problem. But it's not impossible for us to find a way that if you could do the job, you can get the job. If you show what you can do, the job should really look for you. And there's ways to reorient the labor market that way. And but the first thing is, you got to stop these crazy screens that just rule out half of the people because they don't have a bachelor's degree. That's a simple way to start. And then you can get going on sourcing stars and in fact finding them in your own organization.
Well, I think you've just written the prescription for the future. So, as my father used to say, in What Color Is Your Parachute? Yes, so many of the systems are designed to screen people out. We've got to shift that calculus and figure out how we're going to design it especially to screen in the stars of the world. So
that is a core issue, Gary, and there's lots of great ways to do it. There's more and more every day. So that's the problem we can work on together.
All right, awesome. So, Byron, thank you so much for taking the time. I always learn from our conversations. So, and thank you also for setting up our next guest. So,
oh, sure thing. Happy Global Skills Day.
All right, look forward to talking again soon. All right, take care.
Bye.
Mr. Duncan, I think you're muted.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you doing?
Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Thanks for having me.
So Mr. Auguste did a great setup to introduce you. So I rarely use the phrase somebody who needs no introduction. But in your case, I mean, you have just a breathtaking background and command of so many of the issues that we've been discussing here about related to changing our learning systems and changing our work systems. So it's a great opportunity for us to talk. This is the first time we've actually had a chance to connect. And I do appreciate our future learning track chair, Lindsay Knoyven, for introducing us. So thank you for taking the time today.
You do it now. I apologize. I have a hard stop at 1 o'clock my time, so I have about half an hour.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it. So, all right. So, and I think we're going to stop just a few minutes before the hour. So,
Okay.
So I wanted to just, there's so many different places we can dive in, but I first wanted to talk at the sort of systems level, because you've had the chance to see how a country like the United States, how its education system works, and in many cases doesn't work. And in your book, How Schools Work, you talk quite a bit about, you use the phrase, the word lies, about education systems on which they're built. Can you help people understand what some of those sort of fundamental mistruths or misdescriptions of the system are? And then what are the positive corollaries? Like what should the system be believing in?
Yeah, and happy to give pushback, and not everyone agrees with how I view things, but I just try to be very, very honest and speak from the heart. So I listen to what people say, but I spend a lot more time watching the actions. And when I see disconnect between words and actions, that always troubles me. And that's when you start to see the whether it's lies or dishonesty or whatever it might be. So just a couple examples. We say we value teachers, but we don't pay them as professionals. We don't train them as professionals. We don't mentor them as professionals. We don't provide the career ladders. And if we can all agree that maybe the most important thing we can do is get a great teacher in front of every classroom, in front of all of our children, we don't behave like we truly value teachers. Again, if you poll people, say, do you care about teachers? Everybody, 99% of people say, of course we do. In terms of just education more broadly, education is an investment, not an expense. But we, continually spend more. If you look at the state budgets over the past 20 years, I've asked people watching to check any state. If you look at what's the increase in terms of spending over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, incarceration, prisons versus education, you would see one going up at a much faster clip than the other, probably in virtually every other state. And then one that's a tougher one related to education, but sort of very related to work I'm doing now, that we would obviously all say we value our children, but we allow and tolerate a level of gun violence in our country on a daily basis that simply isn't tolerated in other nations. And I would argue other countries, and this is a tough thing to say, but I believe other countries value their children more than we do. So whether it's valuing teachers, whether it's investing in education, whether it's valuing our children, there's an absolute disconnect between what we espouse, between what we say, and our actions, our investments, our public policy choices.
No, absolutely. I mean, these are I think so much of the way we define our worlds, that we develop our belief systems, are the stories that we tell ourselves. And when you get these kinds of cognitive dissonances in the stories that we tell ourselves and the way we actually construct our systems, you get these massive flaws, and then we know what happens. We know the cracks in the system that happen. So are there other countries that you would point to that you think have sort of hacked this in better ways? I mean, I know people typically would point to the school system in Finland, for instance, where teachers are much more elevated. But what are some of those learnings that you've seen from other countries?
Yeah, and again, this is one where we can objectively measure ourselves. And so I always take education and break it down to early childhood, K to 12, and higher ed.
Yeah.
So in early childhood, access to early childhood education, which I would argue is the best investment we can make. If I had one additional tax dollar, I'd put it in the high quality early childhood education to make sure our babies are ready to get started. We rank like 28th or 29th internationally. So there are 27, 20 other countries that prepare their children much better to enter kindergarten academically, socially, emotionally than we do. If you look at math scores, reading scores, science scores, we're usually somewhere between 15th and 30th on the K-12 side, particularly in high school. And then if you look at college attainment, college degrees, and I would argue we should want to lead the world in college completion. You got 4-year universities, 2-year community colleges, trade, technical, vocational training, whatever it might be. A generation ago, Gary, we were first in the world. It's interesting. We haven't dropped. We're stagnated. We're flatlined, and about a dozen countries have passed us. So the long answer to your question is we are top 10 in nothing, not in early childhood education, not K-12, not higher ed. And if we want to keep high wage, high skilled jobs in our communities, in our states, in our nation, in a flat world, in a globally competitive economy, those jobs are going to go to where the most skilled workforce, the most prepared workforce is. I desperately want that to be our country. But right now, there are lots of countries at every level that are out competing us, out investing, out innovating.
No, and in the past, I think that competitive impetus was something that drove us and drove a lot of our thinking at the systemic level and at the community level. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be having the same effect in this era because we don't all agree enough on exactly what those flaws in the systems are and then the ways we need to apply the resources to be able to fix them.
Yeah, what's so interesting to me is that for me, education should be the ultimate bipartisan and nonpartisan issue. There's nothing Republican or Democrat. What we never do is I would just love us as a country to agree on a couple different goals. And I just put a couple on the table. I'd love us to agree that we want to be top 10 in the world in access to high quality pre-K. We have high school graduation rates up to about 84, 85%. I would love to see a national goal of getting high school graduation rates to 90% and then keep going. And then I would love to set a goal of leading the world in college completion. Now, those are goals. For me, again, those should be universal. I say, great military is our best defense. A great educational system is our best offense. Now, we can have lots of vigorous debate on the best strategies to achieve those goals. And this is never one size fits all. I had the privilege of traveling to 50 states, and what works in Montana may not work in California, may not work in Detroit, may not work in Spokane, Washington. So we have lots of different ways of educating kids and trying to achieve those goals and lots of vigorous debate and go where the evidence tells us. But what we always do here, we debate the small ball stuff. We debate the small strategies, not come up for goals. And I would love to see those goals stay with us for a decade, 2 decades, across administrations, across changes in political parties, and keep that focus. But we don't play at that high enough altitude. We get caught into ideological battles around strategies, and that paralyzes us. Yeah,
and I think unfortunately, then it's kind of liken it to a high sugar diet. It gets the energy level up and the blood boiling to talk about the smaller issues and the cultural issues, but it's the systemic change that actually is going to have the longest lasting potential for impact. Now, you talked about I would add a fourth domain to your three, pre-K, K-12. Higher ed and beyond. And sort of as you move along that schedule, what you find is that what I often call the unbundling of education is kind of moving its way down this way. So, but you talked about, biggest bang for the buck. Absolutely. Pre-K training is going to have the longest term effect. There's so much focus, and I know this is a big focus of your organization as well, but on K-12, so many resources have been applied to try to change the K-12 education in the United States, and yet it still seems to be one of those needles that is almost impossible to move. Is it intractable, or are there glimmers or signs of hope where there are really big systemic changes that are possible?
Yeah, it is absolutely difficult, and sometimes used to move at a glacial pace, but I wouldn't call it ever intractable. And I'm always hopeful and optimistic. And obviously, the pandemic has just had a devastating impact on our country, on the world. But it gives us a chance to sort of sit back and reflect. And what I've continually said is that I don't want us to go back to quote unquote normal in school, because normal didn't serve tens of millions of children well enough. So just a couple thoughts of how we can leapfrog with courage. This is not putting a man on Mars. This is not finding a cure for cancer. This is just courage. So first of all, obviously right now, in the summer, I honestly think summer for many children should be obsolete. They don't need that time off. We all know about summer slide. We need students being accelerated, catching up, having access to extracurriculars and finding their passion. And so really thinking very, very differently about the summer calendar. Our 9-month school year, June to September off, is based upon the agrarian economy. And last time I checked, the vast majority of our kids weren't working in the fields. Secondly, we need to think very differently about time and competency. Historically, what's been constant is time, and the variable has been learning. I want to flip that on its head. I want the constant to be learning and the variable to be time. So some children might need 6 hours a day of school. Some children might need 8 or 10 or 11, and not just more academics, but again, chances to find dance, drama, art, music, extracurriculars, sports, robotics, chess, debate, Model UN, you name it. Some children might need 5 days a week. Some children might need 6 days a week. We just talked about some kids might need 9 months out of the year. Some children might need 11 or 12 months out of the year. And what we really need to do is make learning the constant. The easy example is like algebra. Traditionally, you pass algebra by sitting in a class 4 or 5 days a week for an hour for 9 months. If you can pass algebra in 3 months, you should pass it. If it takes 5 months, fine. 9 months. If it takes 15 months, that's fine too. But you should pass algebra when you have that mastery. And then the final one is that you think about. I'll stay with the algebra example. Who are our Albert Einstein algebra teachers? Who are just the world-class teachers? And why are they teaching 100 children a day or 125? Why aren't they teaching 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000? And having children across the country, inner city, rural, remote, Native American reservations have access to the best of the best, and sort of flipping it and keeping some of the stuff online, and then I'm using class time for small group tutorial and individual instruction and getting caught up. So there's some really I think critically important ideas that if we had the courage to implement, we could leapfrog and take some of the lessons coming out of the pandemic and take them to scale.
No, I think it's a brilliant construct because when you talk, for instance, about the constancy of learning over time, I mean, what happens, unfortunately, is that especially when governments, when you've got these rule systems that have existed for a long time, you're often rewarding the wrong behavior. So we track, we reward schools, we pay if students spent a day in school, as opposed to paying that they actually got the learning outcome. And it's the same thing, unfortunately, in our work system. Is a full day of work is something that actually is rewarded throughout the workforce systems, and a shorter amount of hours, if that's all you had available to give, means zero. And so you're talking about a much more flexible approach that changes the paradigm.
Well, it's outcomes-based, not inputs.
Yes, exactly. But the problem is that you've got to change don't change all the incentives in the system, because it's a ripple effect, right? These are all interconnected. And if you're rewarding the old behavior, we still have daylight savings time. That's another reason we're not all working in the fields. And yet we still change our clocks. So don't you have to change that throughout the system? You have to change the rewards so that it all ripples throughout the system?
You do. And again, I'll take it back to where we started, that if you got clarity around goals and agreement on goals, then everything trickles down from that. And how you use time, how you try strategies, how you attempt some things, they're going to fail and adjust. There would be a level of clarity that we just don't have. But whether it's at the national level, the state level, the local level, how many districts, how many states are saying we have X percent of students with access to pre-K now, and we want to get that to 20% higher. Here's our current high school graduation rate, and we want to get it to that to 10% higher. Here's our current college completion rate, and we want to get that. People don't put those, again, this is, politicians on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, again, this is not about ideology, being willing to put out very clear goals, hold themselves accountable, and drive the kind of system change that you're talking about to make those goals not just pie in the sky, but actually very obtainable.
Now, you mentioned the local and the state level, and when I talk about the future of work and learning, I often say there are 4 domains. It's individuals, organizations, communities, and countries. And we've been talking at the country level, there's a systemic level. But what you've done in the Chicago area, you've focused specifically on community, and you've said, okay, here is one of the things we've got to do is we've got to have more people learning so that they get more access to work, and that is going to have a positive impact in reducing our violence levels. So isn't one of the critical places that this happens in communities?
Yeah, so I've been lucky. Sort of the arc of my career was starting out very much in community and then leading the Chicago public schools and obviously going to DC. And now I'm back in community. And so I always say we need good people at every level. All these things interconnect and intersect and reinforce. But for me, trying to solve a very personal and specific and frankly tragic issue, just a staggering level of gun violence in my hometown of Chicago, I thought the best thing I could do was to come home. To be in community and be working directly with young men and women, most likely to be shoot or be shot and caught in these cycles of violence. And so we need help at the city level, we need help at the state level, we need help at the federal level. But for me, after 7 years of DC and sort of traveling the country, it sounds a little cliche, but it was really good for my soul to get back to my roots and be back in neighborhoods every single day. I needed that, and I thought that's where I could be most impactful on this specific issue.
Well, and I often recommend to people that are focused on systems change, because if there's any one aspect of a lot of these shifts in work and learning that we're talking about throughout the day, it's an ecosystems mentality. It's understanding the system you're trying to hack and building collaborative solutions to it. And what's critical is, even for people who are focused on more macro issues or are focused on the individual issues, is to net up and look at your community and the things that you can be helping to catalyze. Because what we've learned in community after community is it's building the connective tissue, a collective vision. Our good friends, James Fallows and Deb Fallows, they wrote the book Our Town, where they went from city to city. Jim's an amateur pilot, and they flew from city to city and got the stories of what communities were doing to revitalize themselves. The formula was the same. The cookbook was the same over and over again. They built that connective tissue, decided on the problems that they wanted to solve. You said, well, hey, you should be picking some of these goals that you have, numerical goals. That's great too. But it's that process you go through of building that connective tissue, of solving those problems together, that then lets you solve the next problem and the next problem. Right?
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, here in Chicago, we're a city of neighborhoods. The violence is hyper localized. 80% of the violence is in 15 neighborhoods. So it's not an overwhelming number of communities, and if we can demonstrate at scale neighborhood violence suppression in one community, then we can go to 3 to 5 to 10 to 15 and grow it. And obviously, the issue is uniquely bad, unfortunately, in Chicago, but it is not unique to Chicago. And I'm talking to people in DC and Detroit and lots of places who are all struggling with this issue of violence. And yes, there'll always be some nuance and some local twist to the work, but there are going to be some commonalities across the country as we try and make our communities safer for our children.
Well, one of the things you've done that I think is brilliant is you've also identified the people that are most at risk and tried to bring the resources to be able to support them. One of the elements we haven't talked about is families, parents, and that kind of engagement. And can you talk a little bit about that process as you're working in these communities? And then let's bring it back to the education system, and especially as it relates to engaging parents in the process of understanding, the ways they can support their young learners.
Yeah, well, the epiphany I had, which shows how not smart I am, as I came out of DC and really tried to think about how to do this work, is that if you want to stop shooting, you have to work with the shooters. And I'm all for working downstream and on the prevention side, but we're at a time of crisis, and you have to sort of try and put your finger in the dike and work with those who are most likely to shoot and be shot. And that profile, unfortunately, here in Chicago, most places, it's the same person. The victim and the perpetrator is literally the same person. So identifying them, that if you want to stop the bullets from flying, you have to create some hope and give folks a reason to put down the guns. And that's exactly who we've targeted. So it's the toughest work I've ever done. It's honestly the most heartbreaking work I've ever done, but it's also the most inspiring. And to see, and we have this happen all the time, young men who have literally been shooting at each other, who have sometimes hit each other, been trying to kill each other, make peace, decide to put down the guns, decide to be the positive leaders for their families and for the community. That transformation it's like, it gives me chills. I could give you a million stories just thinking about it. And we've been trained all your life to retaliate for every slight and to retaliate with lethal force. Having the confidence and the skills to not do that and not make those choices. It's awe-inspiring to be part of that. But to your point, and we need to continue to get better at all of this, and we're making big mistakes every day and learning hard lessons, that none of our men live in a bubble. And so they're safe, they're with us, but they're going back to communities that are war zones. They're going back too often to home situations. And people talk about domestic violence. I don't even talk about domestic violence, it's just violence. And it's sort of naive to think that you'll be violent in the street and that if you go home, everything's going to be okay. So working with partners, significant others, girlfriends, really trying to help build some skill sets and some coping mechanisms when there's stress, which there always is in any relationship, how to handle that without resorting to force. And one of the very unfortunate commonalities of the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of our men, is they did not have fathers in their lives. And many of them are fathers, and to see the pride they're taking in breaking that cycle of absent fatherhood and raising their children. Those family system dynamics are critically important. And we've had many guys get high school diplomas. We just said in college, we have a virtual high school graduation ceremony coming up. But seeing them take pride in doing that, accomplishing things at 28, 29, 30 that, some didn't even never went to high school, never made the transition from 8th grade to high school. They got caught in the streets. It's just extraordinary to see that and see the pride of their family, mothers, grandmothers, aunties, girlfriends, their children, seeing them walk across that stage. It's a great feeling. It's a great day.
No, it's tremendous work. I mean, and I know sometimes you have to count the wins on an individual basis, but hopefully, the wins come with more frequency, and you see yourself starting to shift the dynamic. We were just in an earlier session, Reshni, who's Department of Trade and Industry with South Africa. South African unemployment is 30%, and what it does is it creates this extremely fragile communities where when there are whacks to the side of the head, like what I call the Great Reset of the pandemic, then the significant challenges that appear with people, they're only magnified, right?
Yeah, and I always say, we don't work with boys, we work with men. They're going to eat, they're going to pay rent, they're going to take care of their children. It's up to us whether that's in the legal economy or in the illegal economy, which all too often leads to violence. So men work with us for about a year on average, and then we spin them off into the legal economy. And we have about 40 employers in 11 sectors who are hiring our men at the back end in culinary and hospitality, manufacturing, construction. We have 2 of our men working at law firms downtown, which is pretty amazing. We got 1 working Deloitte. But that employment piece, not just the dignity of work, but being able to support themselves and support their children at the end of the day. Without that, I'm selling false hope. And so having those concrete employment opportunities is critically important to all of our work.
So I just want to, Sherry in the chat gave a great example. She mentions Alberto Volmer's work with gangs in Venezuela. Alberto's a great friend. We've brought him on the stages before. I think what your work and what his work shows that these are addressable problems, right? These are not just things we need to throw up our hands and say, no, you can't build all of that connective tissue. That we actually can build the kind of infrastructure that has community engagement to be able to address the problems directly. So, Arne, our time to me is far too short. I want to hit a couple of questions that people are asking just to make sure we're sort of responding to what the audience is interested in. Alex is asking about a lot of the discussions we've had, for instance, with Lisa with Grow with Google is, there needs to be this connection between employment and industries and what we're teaching people for. But there is also a risk. Are we just basically taking the education system and just knocking out, really basically compliant workers that are going to meet the needs of employers? Are we actually trying to optimize both so that they're actually going to be people are going to be able to get meaningful, well-paid work?
Yeah, it's interesting. Education, we always have these debates and it's either or, and I think that's the wrong dynamic 99% of the time. For me, it's always both and. And so where I started, whether it's 4-year universities, whether it's 2-year community colleges, whether it's trade, technical, vocational training, I just wanted to expose every single young person, definitely in high school, but as early as middle school, to a range of different careers and let them find what their passion is and let them figure out where they can go in this dichotomy between school and work. The rest, all of us, we're going to go to school and learn and work for the rest of our lives. And you have to be able to do both. The day any of us stop learning, the day we're obsolete. So these are, like, again, false dichotomies, false challenges. And for me, it's never about assigning or tracking somebody. You know, we know there's systems in Germany and other places that track children as early as 13, 14, you're going down this path. I don't believe in that. But what I want is every young person to have multiple great options available to them, and let them figure out what's best for them, what's in their heart, what's their passion, what's their genius.
So, Arne, that is a wonderful note to end on. I just absolutely, I love that vision. And I think that's something we all need to work toward achieving. Again, our time was just too short, but thank you so much for your insights. It's just marvelous to see the breadth of understanding and experience that you have at so many different levels in trying to solve these systemic problems. So thank you so much for your insights, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. Have a great day now.
All right, take care. Mr. Hagel, welcome.
Hi there. Hi there.
So my guest is John Hagel. I think I've said before, I don't often use the phrase needs no introduction. John should not, but for the one person in the audience who might not know John's background, John is the former co-director of the Center for the Edge for Deloitte. He's the founder of Beyond Our Edge LLC. He's a tremendous friend. John and I talk on a very regular basis, and he's got some tremendous insights about some of the process I think that we're going through in an era where there's some pretty fundamental changes in our lives and in our work. And you've got a new book that's The Journey Beyond Fear, to help people to understand how to sort of shift the calculus in so much of this the uncertainty that we have in this era. And so I want to go from what we talk about systemically with Arne to talk about personally, just some of the ways that we can help people to be able to understand how they can navigate these so many of the phrases I use, John, are your phrases. So this big shift that so many of us are going through. So John, first off, welcome.
Thank you.
So much of my focus is on the future of work. You and I have these conversations all the time. What's your view of the future of work? I mean, what do you think of as some of the key elements that we need to be thinking about as we go through this big shift in work?
Yeah, it's a topic obviously that's become central to everyone, and it's got so many different dimensions. Everybody talks about where is work going to be done, who's going to do the work. One thing that I don't think is getting enough attention is, what is the work that's going to be done? How is that going to change, if at all? And I believe it's going to change profoundly. I'm going to generalize, as you'll see throughout this, but as a generalization, in large organizations around the world, I believe work today is tightly specified tasks, highly standardized tasks, so they're done exactly the same way everywhere, and tightly integrated tasks. And if that's what work is, guess what? Technology is so much better at tightly specified, highly standardized, tightly integrated tasks. It's going to be all taken by the machine. But my view is it now opens up, it frees up capacity of the human beings to actually do a fundamentally different kind of work. A work that, again, at a high level, I talk about it as addressing unseen problems and opportunities to create more value. Wherever you are in the organization, it's not just in research labs or innovation centers, it's janitors in the facility, it's factory workers, everywhere, addressing unseen problems and opportunities to create more value. And that is a fundamentally human kind of work. That's what we were actually genetically designed for. Thank God the machine is going to help us restore our humanity. I'm grateful.
Well, so John, I don't think probably have been even tracking on the Q&A, but we have an anonymous attendee who said, yes, we can work, but shouldn't we, and then we want to focus on lifelong learning, which is another question I have for you, but shouldn't we bring up kids as value adders? So you just said, yes, it's about finding the value to create. Now, when I talk about these issues, I want to make sure, yes, that we want to continually be focusing on the new problems to solve, the value we can be adding. But if we automate a whole bunch of tasks, you know, a human that has been 100% freed up from former tasks, we call the unemployed. So don't you need to also have the kind of commitment by employers that ensure that you're going to continually have that human, you know, we talk about lifelong learning, but aren't we actually just trying to create the conditions under which that person can continually solve new problems? And the employer also has to sign up for having the kind of structure that allows that person to continually dynamically bind around those new problems.
No, absolutely. I think that the challenge, you talked about the big shift, which has been a key theme in my work. The focus that we have as organizations, again, generalizing around the world, large organizations, is all about efficiency. It's cutting costs, doing things faster and cheaper. And the reaction of most senior executives that I know when confronted with the prospect of automation is, this is wonderful. I can fire so many people and save so much money. Thank God. Versus no, recognizing that the key to success in the future for all organizations is creating more and more value, not just becoming more efficient. And until and unless we get workers freed up from those routine tasks so they can see the value that isn't even been seen before, much less addressed, we're never going to succeed as organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Incidentally, I think that question was from, or the statement was from Mark Prensky, who we've got a video talking about sort of the shift, this mentality about providing value. So, all right. So John, one of the things that is a theme that has come through from a lot of the discussions today in this big shift of what I often call the Great Reset of the pandemic, it is we've defaulted, I think, to first off, what happens when you have massive uncertainty, you've got often massive challenges. Each of us had to, if we had work, we had to learn to work in different ways. If we didn't have work, we suddenly found ourselves, you know, much more disconnected from it. People in learning situations in schools went through that disconnect as well. It's a natural human response, isn't it, to suddenly be fearful, to lose hopeful narratives and instead to focus on the negative narratives. So why did you, especially with your new book, but why did you choose the framing of talking about the emotion of fear? Why does that happen? And then how do we, what is that journey beyond it? How do we get back into that more positive mindset?
No, well, the book has been in process for about 3 years. It just came out, but I started it 3 years ago. And two catalysts. One was that most of my career has been in business strategy. So I've been all about strategy. You have the right strategy, you win. Over time, I've come to realize that it's less about strategy and more about psychology. If we don't understand the emotions that are shaping our choices and actions, best strategy just sits on a shelf somewhere. And again, 3 years ago, I was traveling around the world as part of my work, and I was struck that everywhere I went, the dominant emotion that I was encountering was fear. At the highest levels of organizations, lowest levels, out in the community, fear was everywhere. And while I think it's very understandable, as you said, I believe in this big shift, we are facing a world of mounting performance pressure on many different levels as individuals and as institutions, and that our natural human reaction is fear. I think it's also a very limiting emotion, and actually, in fact, can set in process a doom loop where the more fear you feel, the more actions you pursue that feed the fear, and the more fear you have, the more you have those actions. So, and frankly, unfortunately, I believe that many of our leaders, I'm talking about leaders of companies, but also political leaders, are feeding the fear. They're feeding it, they're intensifying it. At the corporate level, one of the big metaphors today about the need for change is the burning platform. You know, we're on a burn it. We're all going to collapse here. We need to change. And then this whole notion of lifelong learning, you know, when I press, everybody talks about lifelong learning. Nobody, at least in my experience, talks about what's the motivation for lifelong learning. Why? That requires a lot of effort. It takes a lot of risk. Why would you do that? The answer I get back when I push on it from leaders is, well, if they don't learn, they're going to lose their jobs. So get with it, start learning. It's feeding the fear again, you know.
Yeah, irrelevant, redundant. Yeah, those are all fear-based words, right?
And so I think that the key is, you know, finding ways to draw out a different set of emotions, excitement and hope that will let people move beyond the fear. I don't believe the fear is going to go away, but I believe we can develop emotions that will help us to act in spite of the fear and achieve a lot of impact that's more meaningful to us. But
yeah, it's funny because you in the past you would ask somebody who leads in an organization, you know, are you fearful? Oh, no, not of anything. Well, but the framing question we would often ask is, what keeps you up at night? Well, obviously, you are fearful. There's a lot of things that you're worried about. And so it's easy to try to position, especially if you think of yourself as someone who leads in an organization, as the person who doesn't exhibit that kind of emotion, who doesn't. So we are reinforcing an inauthentic narrative for the people who lead in organizations, as opposed to encouraging them to double down on their humanity.
Yeah, the pushback I get from a lot of people who hear what my new book is about, they say, well, I haven't heard a lot of people express fear. And, you know, my response to that is, well, we live in cultures where expressing fear is a sign of weakness. Yeah. If you say you're afraid, you're a weakling. So we don't even acknowledge it to ourselves, much less express it to others. And we express it in other emotions. I believe we're seeing an increasing amount of anger around the world. But if you probe underneath the anger, in my experience, it's largely driven by fear. But anger is a strong emotion. It's a good emotion. Let's be angry. Yes.
Yeah, no, we're being hacked. I mean, there's no question our psychology, they're going to talk about this, I think, in the neuroscience of work and learning. But our psychology is being hacked. And the methodology is the same. It's when you talk about, I think, you know, I always say, you know, polarization is to some extent is a scam, right? Because we're being hacked. We're being focused. We're being focused on this, you know, them and us. But look, it's the same strategies all the same at the same time. Look at them. Look at what they're doing. They're attacking what you believe in and what you care about. It doesn't matter what the source is. It's all the same strategy, and it is fear-based. And so, but you talk about shifting the narrative. You don't say, okay, let's just focus from a systemic standpoint. You say, no, let's get into small groups. Why do you do that? And why is that something you would encourage others to do as they're exploring what that alternative can be?
Yeah, I think part of it is just, you know, I'd say that no matter how smart or talented any one individual is, they're going to learn a lot faster if they're part of a small group that really has different perspectives, different experiences, different ideas, and especially if we're talking about learning in the form of creating new knowledge, which is my focus on learning. It's not just, you know, going to classes and that sort of thing. But I think the key in the small groups is, and the reason I emphasize small, typically 3 to 15 people at most, is because these people have to form deep trust-based relationships with each other. Because the key ultimately of these small groups, the key value is that they really can help us strengthen the emotions to motivate us to move forward in spite of our fear. And that's, I think, the key issue that we're missing if we just try to isolate. And again, with fear, our tendency is to isolate. You know, I can't trust anybody. I just got to do it all myself. You know, I'll figure it out.
Yeah. So John, last question, and then unfortunately our time is so short together. So yeah. You can wave your magic wand. You have one wish that is going to change the narrative, change the approach, change the mindset of people, so that they can have more of the kind of agency that you're talking about. What's John's fix for the world that helps that?
Oh, wow. I don't want to in any way dismiss how challenging this is going to be, but if I had one thing, I would focus on persuading leaders to shift their whole leadership model. Today, leadership is all about having an answer to all the questions. Whatever the question is, you can count on the leader to have an answer. My belief is in the future of work and in scalable learning, we have to have leaders who will ask powerful questions and who will freely acknowledge they don't have an answer and ask for help. Because now that sets up a new culture in an organization to say, actually, questions are really good. They can be enormously powerful. They're not a distraction. Keep asking questions and ask for help so that we can learn together.
That's brilliant. Right. Esther Wojcicki, our good friend, who's going to be in a session later on, who wrote the book Moonshots in Education, she just says the same thing from a learning standpoint. The teacher has to go from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side, the one with all the answers to the one with the best questions. So, John, it's tremendously inspirational. It's great to see you as always. Thank you so much for your perspective, and talk to you again soon. Be well.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. Take care.